The roulette wheel spun one final time, and Frank Sinatra watched $500,000 disappear into the Nevada desert night. The chips scattered across the green felt like his career, his reputation, and quite possibly his life. The casino floor fell silent around him, but Frank's heart hammered so loud he was certain everyone could hear it. The dealer's eyes held no sympathy, only the cold mathematics of the house edge. Frank had bet everything on red 17. The ball had landed on black 8. Sam Giancana approached the table with the measured steps of a man who never hurried, never panicked, and never forgot a debt. His expensive shoes clicked against the marble floor like a countdown timer, each step bringing Frank closer to a conversation he wasn't sure he'd survive. "Tough night, Francis," Sam said, his voice carrying the weight of Sicily and Chicago combined. Frank nodded, unable to trust his voice. The sum wasn't just money. It was more than most people earned in 10 lifetimes. It was enough to buy a mansion, a record label, or a very painful lesson about the cost of desperation. The other gamblers had quietly drifted away from the table, sensing the shift in atmosphere that occurred when Sam Giancana took an interest in someone's problems. Frank was alone now, surrounded by the glittering lights of Vegas, but feeling like he was standing in the middle of a cemetery at midnight. "Walk with me," Sam suggested, though they both knew it wasn't really a suggestion. They moved through the casino floor, past the slot machines and card tables where people were winning and losing small fortunes with casual indifference. Frank had been one of them just hours ago, riding high on a streak that had seemed destined to last forever. The evening had started so differently. Frank had arrived at the Sands with Nancy Sinatra Jr., celebrating her 20th birthday with the kind of extravagant party that only Las Vegas could provide. She'd worn the white dress he'd bought her in New York, laughing as photographers captured every moment of their father-daughter evening. But Nancy had grown tired after midnight, retiring to her suite with a kiss on her father's cheek and a warning that he shouldn't stay up too late gambling. If only she'd known that her innocent birthday celebration would become the night that changed everything. Frank had intended to play conservatively, maybe win enough to buy Nancy a car for her upcoming graduation from college. Instead, he'd been drawn into a high-stakes game with men who treated $100 bills like poker chips. But here's what was truly shocking. The debt wasn't just to the casino. Frank had been borrowing against his future earnings, using his recording contracts as collateral, making promises to people who didn't accept excuses. Sam Giancana owned a piece of the casino, but more importantly, he owned pieces of the men Frank owed money to. They walked onto a private balcony overlooking the strip. The neon lights painted everything in shades of red and gold, but Frank felt like he was seeing the world through a fog of impending doom. "You know what $500,000 represents to me?" Sam asked, lighting a cigarette with a gold lighter that probably cost more than most cars. Frank shook his head, though he suspected the answer would be more complex than simple arithmetic. "It represents trust. When I stake a man to that kind of money, I'm saying I believe he's good for it. I'm putting my reputation behind his word." The cigarette smoke drifted between them like a barrier, but Frank could feel Sam's eyes studying him with the intensity of a man who had made similar calculations about other people's lives. Below them, tourists wandered the strip in blissful ignorance, chasing their own small dreams while Frank's entire world crumbled around him. "I can pay it back," Frank said, the words sounding hollow even to himself. Sam smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "How? Your last album sold what, 50,000 copies? Your contract with Columbia expires in 6 months, and word is they're not planning to renew." Each word hit Frank like a physical blow because they were all true. His career had been sliding for 2 years, ever since the Bobby Soxer craze had ended, and younger singers had started taking his place on the radio. Rock and roll was changing everything, making crooners like Frank seem as outdated as silent movies. "I've got other opportunities," Frank said, though even he wasn't sure what those opportunities might be.
"Like what?"
"Movies." Sam's laugh was soft but cutting. "Hollywood thinks you're yesterday's news. They're making pictures with Rock Hudson and Montgomery Clift now. Clean-cut boys who don't have gambling debts or tabloid scandals." The entertainment industry had become increasingly conservative, blacklisting performers for political associations, moral indiscretions, or simply for being too closely associated with the wrong people. Frank's friendship with Sam Giancana had already cost him several movie roles and recording opportunities. This is where everything changed. Sam flicked his cigarette over the balcony railing and watched it fall toward the street below. But I didn't bring you here to remind you of your problems, Francis. I brought you here because I might have a solution. Frank felt a spark of hope, followed immediately by a chill of fear. Solutions from men like Sam Giancana rarely came without complications that could destroy a man's life, reputation, or both. There's a situation developing in Cuba, Sam continued, his voice taking on the tone he used for serious business discussions. My associates down there have some business interests that need protecting. They need someone with connections, someone who can move in certain circles without attracting attention. Frank had heard rumors about organized crime investments in Cuban casinos, hotels, and businesses. Havana had become a playground for wealthy Americans seeking entertainment that wasn't available in the States, and where there was money, there were always men like Sam looking to claim their share. What kind of circles? Government circles, military circles, the kind where entertainers are welcome but businessmen like me are not. Frank began to understand. Sam wasn't just offering to forgive the debt, he was offering to make Frank useful, to give him value beyond his declining singing career. In exchange for access to powerful people, Frank's financial obligations would disappear. What would I have to do? Sam leaned against the railing, his silhouette framed against the glittering city below. Nothing illegal, nothing that would compromise your artistic integrity. Just carry some messages, make some introductions, help facilitate some meetings between businessmen and government officials. It sounded simple, but Frank had been around long enough to know that nothing involving Sam Giancana was ever as simple as it appeared. Messages between criminals and government officials often concerned activities that existed in legal gray areas, and facilitating such meetings could make Frank an accessory to crimes he didn't even understand. And if I say no? Sam's expression didn't change, but the temperature on the balcony seemed to drop several degrees. Then you owe $500,000 to people who don't offer payment plans or accept IOUs. Frank stared out at the city lights, each one representing someone's dream, someone's ambition, someone's desperate attempt to beat the odds. How many of those dreamers had stood on balconies like this one, facing choices that would define the rest of their lives? The strip stretched out below them like a river of light flowing through the desert. Frank had performed in most of the major casinos, had been treated like royalty by owners who now viewed him as a liability. His fall from grace had been swift and merciless, accelerated by changing musical tastes and personal choices that had alienated both fans and industry executives. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. There's something else you should know, Sam said, reaching into his jacket pocket. The debt isn't really yours anymore. Frank's head snapped around. What do you mean? I bought it. From the casino. From the private creditors, from everyone you owe money to in this city. As of 2 hours ago, you owe everything to me and me alone. The implications hit Frank like a sledgehammer. Sam hadn't just happened to be at the casino tonight. This had been orchestrated, planned, executed with the precision of a military operation. The winning streak, the increasing confidence, the final devastating loss, all of it had been carefully arranged. You set this up, Frank said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The dealers, the other players, even Nancy's birthday party here instead of somewhere else. You made sure I'd lose everything. Sam's smile was enigmatic, neither confirming nor denying Frank's accusation. I made sure you'd have choices, Francis. Bad choices and worse choices, but choices nonetheless. Frank felt the walls of his life closing in around him. Everything he'd thought was random had been carefully arranged. Every decision he'd made tonight had been influenced by forces he hadn't even known existed. His daughter's innocent birthday celebration had become the backdrop for his own financial destruction. Why me? Because you're talented enough to be useful, desperate enough to be controllable, and famous enough to get invited places where ordinary men can't go. The honesty was more frightening than any threat could have been. Sam saw him as a tool, an asset to be acquired and deployed. Frank realized that his singing career, his fame, his entire identity had become commodities in a game much larger than he'd ever imagined. You've been planning this for months, Frank said, understanding finally dawning. Longer than that, I've been watching your career decline, your debts increase, your options disappear. I knew eventually you'd reach a point where you'd need help from someone who could provide it. Wait, here's the detail you missed. The Cuba situation isn't just business, Sam continued, his voice taking on a different tone. It's personal. I have a daughter, Francis. She's living in Havana with a man I've never met, married to someone who claims to be a businessman but might be working for people who want to hurt my family." Frank saw something different in Sam's eyes now, not the cold calculation of a crime boss, but the worry of a father who'd lost contact with his child. It was a vulnerability that Sam rarely showed, and Frank realized he was being trusted with information that could be used against one of the most powerful men in America. "You want me to check on her? I want you to perform at the Nacional Hotel in Havana. While you're there, I want you to find out who my daughter married, and whether she's safe. If she's in trouble, I want you to get her out." The mission suddenly became more complex than simple message delivery. This wasn't just about carrying communications between criminals and government officials. Sam was asking him to potentially rescue a family member from a situation that might involve rival criminal organizations, foreign governments, or revolutionary forces. What if she doesn't want to be rescued? What if she's happy with her new life? Sam's jaw tightened and Frank caught a glimpse of the violence that lurked beneath the polished exterior. "Then you convince her that staying in Cuba right now isn't safe for anyone with American connections, especially anyone related to people in my line of work." Frank understood the implications. The political situation in Cuba was deteriorating rapidly. Batista's government was under siege from Castro's revolutionaries, and American business interests were caught in the crossfire. Anyone with ties to American organized crime would be particularly vulnerable if the political winds shifted. "When would I have to leave?" "Tomorrow night. There's a plane waiting at a private airfield outside the city. You'll travel as part of an entertainment delegation, completely legitimate, completely above board." Everything was already arranged, just like the gambling debt and the evening's orchestrated losses. Sam had been planning this operation for months, maybe years, waiting for the right moment to activate his unwilling asset. "What about Nancy? She'll want to know where I'm going." "Tell her you're performing in Miami for a week. Private parties for wealthy clients. She'll understand that you need the money." Frank felt sick at the thought of lying to his daughter, especially after she'd witnessed his gambling losses tonight. Nancy had grown up watching her father's career fluctuate, understanding that financial stability was never guaranteed in the entertainment business. "What you've seen so far is nothing." "There's one more thing," Sam said, reaching into his jacket again.
"My daughter doesn't know who her father really is."
"As far as she's concerned, I'm just a successful businessman from Chicago who imports olive oil and wine." He handed Frank a photograph. The young woman in the picture was beautiful, dark-haired, with eyes that seemed to hold secrets of their own. She was standing on a beach, laughing at something off-camera, completely unaware that her father was one of the most powerful criminals in America. "Her name is Isabella. She goes by Bella. She thinks she married a Cuban businessman named Carlos Rivera, but our intelligence suggests Rivera has connections to Meyer Lansky's operations in Havana." Frank studied the photograph, committing the woman's face to memory. She looked innocent, happy, completely removed from the world of violence and corruption that surrounded her father's business. The resemblance to Sam was subtle but unmistakable, the same dark eyes, the same determined jawline. "If Rivera is working with Lansky, why is that a problem? Aren't you and Lansky partners in some of your business ventures?" Sam's expression darkened, and Frank realized he'd touched on a sensitive subject. "We were partners, past tense. Meyer's been making moves in Cuba without consulting Chicago. He's building relationships with Castro's people while publicly supporting Batista, playing both sides." The political complexity was staggering. Frank realized he was being sent into a situation where American criminals were aligned with different Cuban factions, where today's ally could become tomorrow's enemy, where a simple rescue mission could trigger an international incident. "Meyer thinks he can survive whoever wins the Civil War by having connections to both sides," Sam continued. "But revolutions don't work that way. Eventually, winners settle scores with anyone who helped their enemies, even if they also helped them." Frank began to understand why Sam was worried about his daughter. If Isabella was married to one of Lansky's associates, and if Castro's forces eventually won control of Cuba, she could be targeted for elimination along with other Americans connected to the Batista regime. "What if I get caught? What if the Cuban government finds out I'm not just there to entertain tourists?" "Then you'd better be very good at entertaining," Sam said, "because that might be the only thing that keeps you alive. You won't believe this, but Frank spent the next 18 hours in a whirlwind of preparation that felt more like planning for war than arranging a singing engagement. Sam's people provided him with a detailed cover story, forged documentation, and contacts in Havana who could help if things went wrong. But as Frank packed his suitcase in his hotel room the following evening, he discovered something that changed his understanding of the entire operation.
Hidden in the lining of the suitcase was a second photograph, one Sam hadn't shown him during their balcony conversation.
This photograph showed Isabella Rivera sitting at a cafe table with a man who clearly wasn't her husband. The man was younger, American, wearing the kind of conservative clothes that suggested government employment. They were holding hands across the table, looking at each other with unmistakable intimacy. On the back of the photograph, someone had written in careful script, FBI agent Robert Harrison, assigned to Cuban intelligence operations, relationship with subject began 6 months ago. Frank stared at the photograph, understanding finally that Sam's daughter hadn't just married into a criminal organization. She was having an affair with a federal agent who was probably investigating her husband's operations, and possibly her father's business interests as well. The rescue mission had just become exponentially more dangerous. If Frank tried to extract Isabella from Cuba, he might be interfering with an FBI operation. If he left her there, she might be killed when the inevitably violent confrontation between criminals and federal agents erupted into open warfare. But there was something else in the photograph that made Frank's blood run cold. In the background, barely visible among the other cafe patrons, sat a man Frank recognized from newspaper photographs and FBI surveillance reports. Mickey Cohen, the Los Angeles crime boss who had tried to muscle into Frank's business empire just 2 years earlier. Mickey was in Cuba watching Isabella Rivera meet with an FBI agent, and Sam Giancana apparently didn't know about it. The photograph had been taken from a distance, suggesting surveillance by a third party who was monitoring both the affair and Mickey's interest in it. Frank realized that he wasn't just being sent to rescue Sam's daughter. He was walking into the middle of a war between criminal organizations, with federal agents, revolutionaries, and foreign governments all playing roles in a conflict that could reshape the balance of power throughout the Caribbean. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. Sam wanted his daughter rescued from what he thought was simply a dangerous marriage to one of Lansky's associates, but Isabella was actually involved with an FBI agent, being watched by Mickey Cohen, and living in a country on the verge of revolution. Frank found a third item hidden in his suitcase, a small recording device disguised as a cigarette lighter. Attached to it was a note, "Record everything, trust no one. Your debt will be forgiven when you deliver proof of what's really happening in Cuba." The note wasn't signed, but Frank recognized the handwriting as Sam's. Apparently, the rescue mission was secondary to intelligence gathering. Sam wanted documentation of his rival's activities, evidence he could use to protect his own interests or destroy his enemies. The plane to Havana was leaving in 4 hours, and Frank still owed $500,000 to a man who now expected him to navigate one of the most dangerous political situations in the world while secretly recording everything for purposes Frank didn't fully understand. But what nobody knew, what Sam Giancana couldn't have anticipated, was that Frank Sinatra had made a decision that night on the balcony, a decision that would change everything. He wasn't going to Cuba just to rescue Isabella Rivera or gather intelligence for Sam Giancana. He was going to Cuba to find out why Mickey Cohen was interested in Sam's daughter, why the FBI was using her to investigate criminal activities, and whether the gambling debt that had started this entire situation had been orchestrated by more than one criminal organization. Frank had spent his career reading audiences, understanding the subtle dynamics of rooms full of strangers, sensing when applause was genuine and when it was polite. Those same skills were about to be tested in an environment where the wrong interpretation could result in a shallow grave in the Cuban countryside. The suitcase closed with a soft click that sounded ominously final. Frank looked around his hotel room one last time, knowing that when he returned to Las Vegas, he would either be free from his debts or he would be dead. There were no other options in Sam Giancana's world. Some gambles, he realized, were bigger than money. Some debts could only be paid with blood, betrayal, and the kind of loyalty that could only be earned at the point of a gun. As Frank rode toward the airport in a taxi provided by Sam's organization, the neon lights of Vegas fading in the rear window, he thought about the photographs hidden in his suitcase. Isabella Rivera didn't know that her secret affair was being documented by multiple intelligence agencies and criminal organizations. Agent Harrison didn't know that his cover was blown and his life was probably in danger. Sam Giancana didn't know that his daughter was sleeping with a federal agent who was investigating him. And Mickey Cohen didn't know that Frank Sinatra was coming to Cuba not as Sam's obedient errand boy, but as a man with his own agenda and his own reasons for wanting to survive the coming storm. The private plane waited on a darkened runway, its engines already running. Frank climbed aboard, carrying with him the accumulated weight of $500,000 in debt, a lifetime of poor decisions, and the slim hope that he was smart enough to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. The gambling debt that had started everything was about to be paid in full, but the currency wouldn't be money. It would be blood, betrayal, and the kind of information that could topple governments or destroy criminal empires. Frank settled into his seat as the plane taxied toward takeoff, carrying him toward a confrontation that would either restore his career and clear his debts, or ensure that he never saw American soil again. The wheel of fortune had spun one final time, and Frank Sinatra was about to discover whether he'd won everything or lost it all.